Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. Hey, a quick reminder, if you haven't signed up yet for Bulwark Plus, please consider doing it. You have an opportunity to listen into our Thursday night live streams, also the whole suite of newsletters and podcasts that we have, the Next Level Podcast, the Secret Podcast, my newsletter, Morning Shots, JVL's newsletter, The Triad. And of course, we also have podcasts by Mona Charen, by Sunny Bunch. And of course, this podcast, which will remain free. And so speaking of Mona
and
Charen's,
mine's free too.
Absolutely, I was just going to say. And speaking of Mona's podcast, by the way, congratulations! It was really interesting listening to George Will sit down with you guys and talk.
Thanks.
The podcast Beg to Differ. Please check it out.
Always great to have George.
So Mona, I'm having one of these days where a few weeks ago, I had a moment of irrational exuberance. and I was writing about springtime and how it's possible the springtime is going to be amazing. All of these things, the economy is going to roar back. We're going to come out of our caves because we will have beaten the pandemic. And I wake up today and I'm thinking, are we really going to screw this up? We're in this mad race against recklessness. You have the head of the CDC giving this tear. Did you hear her yesterday giving this tearful? I have this sense of impending doom. Yeah. Okay, really impending. It's supposed to be springtime.
Yeah,
impending doom. And so it's this question of we are so close, and yet there is this massive rush to crazy, which seems to be like the world we live in. Do you know what I mean?
It sure does. So first, let me just say the choice of the word doom was probably overwrought. We are, for better or worse, we are coming out of this pandemic one way or another. But we seem to be doing it. We could have done it the easy way or the hard way. And we, of course, are choosing to do it the hard way, namely by not being grown-ups and saying, okay, we're almost there. Just hang tight, continue wearing your masks, continue social distancing. We're almost there. Hang in there. No, we went on a tear. Spring break was a loony show. Miami had to impose a curfew. People just decided, that a nation of 13-year-olds, well, of course, a lot of the people who are on spring break are young people, but still, even among older people, there's this lack of maturity, this lack of, being able to delay gratification is one of the marks of an adult. And yet, we're not able to do that. And so, of course, we're going to get a fourth wave of infections. We're in it now. I don't know how big it's going to be, but we're definitely having it because we're too immature as a country to just wait it out.
Yeah, the Washington Post reporting troubling signs abounded Monday. Daily case counts continue their trend in the wrong direction. 7-day rolling average of infections rose for the seventh consecutive day, finishing just below 64,000. I think the cases are up by 12%, and hospitals around the country are reported admitting younger people with more severe diseases. And what they're saying is that new variants are out there.
Yes. And apparently the new variants are not like the original one, hitting almost exclusively older people, not exclusively, but, heavily tilted toward older people. Apparently some of these variants are hitting younger people, which is, as we recall, what happened in the 1918 flu, which actually was one of the reasons it was so horrific, was that it targeted young people. I mean, it was very deadly for those who were young and healthy.
Well, and also the politics of this, which seems to be constant. Ron DeSantis appears to be running for president by being as reckless as possible. That this is his thing, and he's in sort of a race for who's the most brazenly reckless. Is it going to be him or is it going to be Kristi Noem? And they keep escalating this. I mean. And I want to talk about the vaccine passports in a moment. But so yesterday, Florida businesses won't be able to screen customers based on whether they've received the vaccines, DeSantis said on Monday, even as he signed a bill designed to shield companies from pandemic-related lawsuits. So it is if there's this ideological, well, not seems like there is an ideological opposition to doing what needs to be done. And this is not a new story, is it? I mean, whether it's the shutdowns, or whether it's the masks, or whether it's the vaccines.
Right. But it's so incoherent. It's so discontinuous with what you and I used to understand to be a conservative worldview, right? I mean, because these are individual businesses, they're private property. Um, um, Certainly, it was a tenet of conservative philosophy that on your own property, you should be free as far as possible from government intrusion and government dictates telling you how to run your business or how to conduct yourself. And here are business owners saying, for the sake of my customers, my employees, myself, whatever, I want to impose a restriction. If you put a sign in your window of your business and say, no, shoes, no shirt, no service, right? Is Ron DeSantis now going to come along and say, you can't do that? Sorry.
Well,
I mean, sorry,
who knows?
go ahead.
Okay, no.
Yeah.
The craziness of this, and I was trying to narrow it down. You have all of these memes on social media that somehow this is like the Nazis demanding your paper, or that if you have to have a vaccine passport, that's somehow like having a yellow star sewn on your clothes. Do you remember Naomi Wolf, by the way?
Oh, yes.
And that Naomi Wolf, who is one of those people who are famous for being famous at one time and has had this spectacular meltdown. We don't need to go back through it, but I mean, she was an author of a book that had to be withdrawn because the publisher realized that it was basically full of shit. I mean,
all of her books are that.
Yes. Exactly. Well, anyway, she's now become a leading, anti-vaccine passport spokesman. She was on Fox News, and we have an 11-second soundbite that I think captures where Naomi Wolf and some of the folks on the right are going here.
I am not overstating this. I can't say it forcefully enough. This is literally the end of human liberty in the West if this plan unfolds as planned.
Okay, Mona.
Yeah, I know. But by the way,
literally.
Literally, yes.
Literally.
But there's something that we should just point out for maybe younger listeners. But Naomi Wolf was a key figure on the left. I mean, she's not from the right wing fever swamps. Okay, in fact, she was hailed as the great new third wave feminist by Gloria Steinem and others. She was an advisor to Al Gore in his 2000 campaign. Famously, there's been dispute about this, but it's reported that she urged him to be an alpha male and to wear earth tones. But anyway, yeah. So that's who she is, and so the crazy, you've talked a lot about this, and I think when you're in the midst of this kind of sea change in a society, it's awfully hard to get your bearings and really get a handle on what's really going on. And there's a lot of interesting discussion about the role of information and the internet and technology and social media and so on. And the rewards for being crazy now are substantial, right? I mean, the incentive structure, yes, is such that you do get attention the crazier you are. And, for a lot of people, that's enough to push them toward the most extreme position, leaving aside all the algorithms and all of that we know about that push people toward extremism. But just the attention seeking alone is enough.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, it is, the attention seeking is enough. I mean, Naomi Wolf, actually, I'm trying to remember her spectacular fall from grace, which was really amazing. Because I listened to the whole. I think was it a BBC or was it a public radio interview?
Yeah.
She had written a book about how back in the 19th century, homosexuals used to be executed on a regular basis. And the whole book was based on her historical analysis of the number of cases of capital punishment that had been done. And during the interview, the person's walking her through all this and saying, well, do you know actually that this term that you used to say that the person was executed doesn't mean that at all? In fact, there were almost no one who was executed based on all of this. This term actually had this meaning in British law as opposed to what you're saying. And she had no idea. So the entire book was based on this dumb misreading of the law, and she was exposed on live radio. So you would think that, okay, that's it. She's done. She's going to be, she's discredited forever, but she's figured out a way to be relevant again by going with this hysterical, these people are trying to destroy your freedom. But what I love is that this is literally the end of human liberty in the West if we have vaccine passport. So first of all, I mean, my understanding is the vaccine passport would be used by private businesses, private individuals to set their own policies, right? To assure people that their customers and their employees are safe. Now, until about, as you pointed out, until about like 5 seconds ago, conservatives supported the rights of private businesses to set their own rules, right? And they defended private property rights.
Mm-hmm.
And now suddenly it's like, no, only Nazis would require this kind of a passport.
It's so beyond stupid. I mean, the hysteria is just remarkable. I mean, consider that even if the government itself were to impose an obligation to show a vaccine passport, right? To do various things like fly on an airplane or enter a public building or something, right? Even that would not be the end of civilization, the end of our liberties. I mean, it would be an imposition on some people who made a free choice not to get the vaccine, which was, their right, but it has some consequences. But furthermore, in all likelihood, this is going to be a temporary measure in any case, because soon the combination of vaccines and herd immunity will make this a small problem. The virus probably akin, I'm not an epidemiologist, but probably akin to the flu, that we'll always have to deal with, but will not be a world pandemic, And so anyway, but as we've seen, this kind of end of the world rhetoric is what gets you attention, and it's what apparently gets people to open their wallets and send you money. And so, a lot of politicians use it. And it doesn't bode well for our future as a self-governing people. This kind of crazy hysteria.
Well, you mentioned getting on an airplane. I mean, can we just take a deep breath here? That if you get on an airplane, you have to show a lot of different things. I mean, the whole notion that if you had to show a vaccine passport, that would be the end of liberty as we know it. Excuse me, try to get on an airplane without showing an ID, a real ID, without going through TSA screening. And there was a time when we understood that in the face of an emergency or various threats, that we would have to go through those inconveniences. So, I mean, this is the thing. The people who are the most in favor of things like IDs for voting and real IDs, right, for traveling, are the ones who are the most upset that you'd have to show this piece of paper. I mean, why is it that voting IDs are absolutely crucial, but a passport vaccine passport used by private individuals would be, Nazis? Do they understand that in order to drive a car, you have to carry a driver's license? Do they understand that we have social security cards? Do they understand that there are many public schools in America where you have to show a proof of vaccination to have your kid go to school? I mean,
indeed. And boy, is that an imposition on your liberties? I mean, there you go. Charlie, you make an excellent point. And the one thing that I would just add is that, we've already been living under this terrible Nazi rule that you might have to put a piece of cloth over your face.
Well, this is where there's two things that have been lost. Let's talk about this from a conservative point of view, because conservatives are in favor of freedom, individual freedom, right?
Right.
And people are free not to get vaccinated. But as you pointed out, there are consequences for the exercise of that right. One of the consequences might be that you're not allowed to endanger the life and safety of your fellow citizens. But also, the way in which you see people, particularly on social media, talking about, freedom and the masks, it's not freedom. It's this juvenile selfishness.
Exactly.
And so it's not only do they misunderstand freedom, but the whole concept of caring for your fellow citizen or having social responsibility or being patriotic, doing things for the common good, have those become completely now just rejected by elements of the right?
Well, by elements of the right, I wouldn't say
Elements of
by
the right.
I
No.
wouldn't say by the whole right. But can you imagine how John F. Kennedy's inaugural address would go down now in this
Yes,
country?
not. Yeah. You don't
I
owe
mean,
your country a damn thing.
exactly. It's like, give me mine, give me mine, give me mine. And I have no responsibilities. People don't understand the trade-offs. Look, here, you want to talk about unfreedom. Okay. So you were saying, let's just spell it out. Okay. You have the right to refuse to get vaccinated, but there are consequences to that decision that you made with your free will. Okay. The consequence is you're not going to be allowed to go to this restaurant. May not be allowed to get on an airplane. You may not be allowed to do a number of things that you would like to do. Okay. That's your choice. You are free. Okay. In China, when you are pregnant and you want the baby and they say you have to get an abortion and you say no, and they strap you onto a gurney and forcibly abort that child, that's government coercion. Okay.
There is a distinction there, right? There is a distinction there. But I guess, why do we wear this? This is bothering me more and more, even though it's not a new thing. Why do we wear masks? Because we want to protect the vulnerable people in our society from getting sick, right? That we want, and also, even if it's virtue signal, it's signaling that we want to be responsible citizens. And being a responsible citizen and understanding that there are responsibilities as well as rights used to be universal among conservatives.
Yeah.
Universal. And, even the hyper libertarian wing of the right always would understand what was that cliche about the, my freedom ends where your nose begins or something like that. So there was always a limit to it.
It does strike me that that the rhetoric of the right, again, has changed. It used to be, for example, on the subject of guns. Now, I've always been a bit of a apostate on this issue. I've always been in favor of a certain amount of gun control, which put me at odds with other people on the right. But I remember that, 30 years ago, the arguments about guns tended to stress, and the NRA itself, which, by the way, is now, of course, in deep trouble. But anyway, and it has become completely corrupt. But the NRA used to make the argument that, look, we are for responsible gun ownership. We teach classes in how to be a good, responsible grown-up handling a gun. We urge everyone to be responsible, but we don't think that gun control is the way to go because, the criminals will not take our classes and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that was the argument. But they implicit was that, of course, there are responsibilities that accompany rights, and that part of it, the responsibility argument, just kind of faded away. And it was more this kind of truculent, come and take it from my cold, dead hands kind of rhetoric, and a lot more kind of, extreme rhetoric about potentially using your gun, not for self-defense, but against an imperial or a repressive state. You started to see a lot more of that kind of talk. And I think this is a theme that has been percolating for a while of, just forgetting and downplaying the responsibilities that come with freedom and stressing rather the rights and the sort of cussed unwillingness to be imposed upon for any reason, even such a basic thing as consideration for your neighbor,
Yeah,
who
exactly.
might have an underlying health condition or who just doesn't want to get sick. I mean, it's just
Well,
it's
on the gun thing, you're right. I mean, I live in a state, of course, where there are a lot of sportsmen who are very, very responsible with their guns, and I think there's a real gap between the ideologues on the guns and and many of the real gun owners who really do emphasize safety, as opposed to this sort of performative recklessness that you get from the people who use the guns as a fetish, which we've talked about before. The Lauren Boeberts and the
Mhm.
Marjorie Taylor Greens or the Lindsey Graham, who use it as like, this is how, that we're, tough and that we fight, because that's just bizarre. So yeah, Lindsey Graham, is explaining why he has to have an AR-15, that if there's a natural disaster and the gangs, you know where those gangs come from, if they start roaming around South Carolina, they're not going to come to his house because they're going to go, yo, stay away from Lindsey because
Yeah.
he has the biggest gun out there. Does this happen a lot, by the way? I mean, are there roving gangs in South Carolina after natural disasters that you need to fight off with AR-15s? I just kind of wonder, because we kind of know about the downside of the AR-15, which is designed to kill human beings. I don't know. This is that disconnection.
They're constantly fantasizing about a zombie apocalypse. I don't know. Maybe it's some sort of unfulfilled wish of theirs. Maybe they've been watching too many science fiction movies. I'm not sure, but yeah. Last I checked, we haven't had one of those zombie apocalypses in South Carolina.
So, okay, I should have done my research on this before I asked this question, but I've kind of been haunted by this thought. The last shooting in Boulder, Colorado, there were 10 people that were killed. How many people were just wounded?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
There
see,
are always a lot.
I don't know, and
Yeah.
the reason I'm thinking about it is that when you use certain kinds of guns, people aren't wounded; they're all killed. I mean,
Oh.
you're using a caliberable bullet that
Mm.
would. I saw a discussion yesterday. Somebody said, "Well, we need the the AR-15 for hunting," and they're saying, "Well, you know what? You use certain kinds of ammunition, and it's basically going to vaporize any animal, smaller than a bear. You just don't
Mm.
generally use it. A deer hunter is going to use a 22 caliber often, and these other bullets. So let's stick with the coronavirus just for a moment, because what's happening right now, this massive rush to open up the pushback against the vaccine passport, which, by the way, the vaccine passport is really, and you made this point before, it's a transitional point to get us back to normal. If you want freedom, this is how you get freedom to get back to your life. Right.
Right.
I mean, you have this inconvenience, a very minor inconvenience, to get back to freedom. But this whole pushback is really a flashback to what we experienced last year that Deborah Birx is now describing under Donald Trump, where he was downplaying it, and there was this big push to open up and we don't need to do this, and became very, very politicized. But I'm interested in your thoughts on Deborah Birx, who's now coming forward and saying that that maybe if they had done a better job, if they had mitigated the pandemic earlier, they might have reduced the death toll substantially. The first 100,000, she said, you can sort of, okay, we were taken by surprise. The other 400,000 might have been preventable, and she's bothered by this now.
Well, I'm glad she's bothered. I don't know if that's the proper word. Look,
I think haunted would be a better word.
Haunted would be a better word. Look, people seem to have a lot of trouble teasing apart these sorts of things. They polls consistently showed that voters didn't blame Donald Trump for his handling of the pandemic, which is just kind of stunning because he didn't just bungle it, right? He was an accelerant to the worst possible response. That is, politicizing it, downplaying it to the point, lying about it, encouraging people to do the worst kinds of behaviors, and inhibiting our government's capacity to respond because he didn't want testing, which would therefore reflect badly on him when the numbers came in. I mean, there were just so many things. And yet voters didn't vote. Voters didn't hold him accountable. All right. Now, as for how you evaluate people like Fauci and Birx, there's the old argument, well, certain, competent people had to be around the president in order to keep him from doing worse things and to keep the bus, running. Yeah. Well, I have trouble with that argument because I think there are moments where, and there have been so many, where if a critical mass of people had resigned in protest, they explained it, they might have done far more good. When competent people, when seemingly competent people, block and tackle for the president, when they appear with him and give him legitimacy, a lot of viewers say, well, look, he's got these experts and they seem okay with him, and she, of course, took it to another level. I mean, Fauci would, just do the bare minimum to be civil and not get on Trump's bad side while trying his best to tell the truth. But she went much further. She went out there and said, oh, he understands the science and he's very attentive to all of the research and really has a grasp of these matters and so on. She really didn't need to do that. And she lost her bearings, I think, and that was disgraceful.
It was disgraceful, and I do think this whole question of the justifications for collaboration and there's the whole range. In some cases, I think it may have been a good thing. I mean, I think we were better off having James Mattis in as Secretary of Defense for as long as we did. There were others that didn't do any harm. But if you're going to write a study of the downsides of collaboration, Deborah Birx really becomes kind of a patient zero because she did go too far. She did do that North Korean style praise. JVL has a great newsletter yesterday about the disgrace of Deborah Birx. She was also part of the effort to downplay the significance of this throughout the pandemic, in order to, I think, to constantly repair her relationship. You had this with Robert Redfield from the CDC, Secretary Azar. A lot of these guys were very, very concerned to stay on Donald Trump's good side, even though they knew that what they were doing might be lethal, that it might lead to human, the death of human beings. And for her now to come back and to try to sort of rewrite the history that I was this person, I think really does ring hollow. And her use of the word, "this bothers me," she should be haunted by it. And quite frankly, the main responsibility rests with Donald Trump. There's no question about that. But these enablers, and these were enablers, these were the people who were the front people, and these were the people who were the architects. We don't know whether if they would have stood up and blown the whistle, it would have made a difference. But at some point, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you're going to be remembered the way she's going to be remembered.
Well, I hope you're right about the way she's going to be remembered, and that this won't work. Let me just add one other little footnote to her story, because, as you know, there did come points with Fauci where he felt the need to be plain spoken and got on Trump's bad side, and Trump began to, in fact, Trump had his minions put out all of these, press releases about how Fauci had been wrong and so on and so forth. He went to war with Fauci at one point. He never did that with Birx, never. And so she is now claiming, based on only her own recounting, that she had an uncomfortable phone call with him and that he was mean to her on the phone or some such thing. And yet she was very vague about the nature of this phone call and whether anybody else knew about it and so on. And so I think she's trying again, maybe trying to pull a fast one here and claim that, she was actually not on his good side the whole time, when it certainly
Yeah.
appeared from the outside. And he's not shy, let's face it, about going after people that he perceives to be in the smallest way critical of him.
Yeah, he released this word salad statement yesterday.
Now he has, yeah.
I was tempted to do an impressionistic reading of it, but I think that would be too much to ask for the listeners. But this is what the one paragraph Trump writes, or somebody writes for Trump based on the language here. Based on the interviews, I felt it was time to speak up about Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, two self-promoters. That's hilarious. Trying to reinvent history. That's also hilarious. To cover for their bad instincts and faulty recommendations. Also hilarious. Which I fortunately almost always overturned. They had bad policy decisions that would have left our country open to China and others, closed to reopening our economy, and years away from an approved vaccine, putting millions of lives at risk. So he's pushing back and he's dumping on them how terrible they were, how dumb they were.
Can we, if there is one thing that I wish we could enact into law as a consequence of the Trump experience, it would be forcing every voter to sign a statement agreeing that they will not vote for anyone for president that they would not have as the president of their homeowners association.
Oh my gosh.
Because, he is such a moron and he's such a malevolent figure. And yet, one other trip down memory lane. Many, many moons ago, you had A.B. Stoddard, the great A.B. Stoddard, on your podcast, and you were talking about a figure. I can't remember who it was. It might have been the My Pillow guy. I don't know who it was, but A.B. said this person is either certifiably nuts or is running for something. And I thought, well, there you go. Because in American life, right, if you're certifiably nuts, the only realm in which you can have a good shot at succeeding is in elective office.
No, that's literally true. There's no corporation or business in America that would hire Donald Trump as its CEO, and you or even put them on the board of directors. And you think about some of the people that Trump surrounded himself with, who would hire them? What homeowners association would hire them? What nonprofit organization would hire? It's really the only it is like a carve out in politics where people would say, I wouldn't trust that guy with my life, my money, my wife, or my children, but I'm going to trust him with the nuclear codes and the fate of the country.
That's it. I mean, I think historians will puzzle about this for many years, assuming that the country survives enough to have historians interested.
So let's talk about populism for a moment, because I know you have some thoughts about all of this, that once again, we're seeing the veneer of populism around much of this. And yet, the people who they claim to be looking out for are the ones who almost invariably are the ones who end up getting screwed.
That's it. And, I was thinking about that. I saw a quote from Tim Pawlenty, who I think he was governor of Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
Your neighboring state.
Yeah.
And I always thought he was a, really good, sort of solid guy.
Yeah.
And kind of ahead of the curve on some of the issues that he felt the Republican Party should address itself to and so forth. But anyway, he was talking about the future of the party, and he was saying something along the lines of, well, it needs to be populist, of course, going forward. And I was thinking, this term, is one that people like. That's the name. But if you look around at history, it is always, I would defy people to come up with an example of a populist figure who didn't turn out to be a scam, right? It is always a scam. That is somebody like Hugo Chavez, right, in Venezuela, who was a big populist, and he was for the people, and he was going to screw the elites, and he got big, electoral victories. And of course, sometimes he rigged the following elections, but in any event, he was popular. And he was a populist. And in Venezuela, the people who paid the price for supporting a populist were not the elites, although, things got worse for everyone. But the elites were basically okay. They could get out of the country. They were shielded by their wealth. It was the poor and the middle class that really paid the most terrible price. If you look at what's happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro, another big populist, Brazil has one of the worst COVID response rates in the world, one of the worst vaccination rates. All of those measures, it's inevitably, and it goes, of course, all the way back in human history. You can go back to the Romans, where the populists, come to power by telling the people that they're going to screw the elites on their behalf. And of course, they just become the new elite and they screw the ordinary guy. And it's just kind of a, I think that's what struck me, is that the term populist should have shame associated with it. It should be an ignominious word. And for good people like Palenti to say, yeah, we need to be populists. Like, no, we don't. We need to be Democrats, small d. We need to be Republicans, small r. We need to have integrity. We need to be interested in the welfare of all our fellow citizens. But populism has a really nasty track record.
I wonder what Palenti actually means. I mean, sometimes these words get so mushy. Maybe he was just saying that Republicans need to be popular by by actually having policies that people would vote for, as opposed to pursuing policies that make it harder to vote. Who knows?
Yeah. No, that could well be. I mean, no disrespect to Palenti, since this was just a clip that I saw. Yeah.
But the cognitive dissonance of listening to Republicans who will say, well, we can't be the party of, the country club elite anymore, except while Donald Trump literally lives in a country club.
Well, yeah.
Like a man literally owns country clubs, lives in country clubs. He is the definition of a country club Republican.
Well, no, exactly.
And the cognitive dissonance of looking at Donald Trump and saying, yes, there's a manly man and there's a man of the people. Really, what?
No, I completely agree. But at the same time, you also, I mean, not to be too maudlin about this or morbid about it, but honestly, hundreds of thousands of people who probably voted for Donald Trump thinking that they were going to get a tribune of the people are dead because of his poor handling of a virus that, hurt a lot of people in his voting cohort. So
that's true. So you mentioned Minnesota politics. Now, Minnesota politics is interesting to me because they're next door and because they're weirder than we are here in Wisconsin.
Or just saying something.
I remember this is a state that actually elected Jesse the Body Ventura as governor. Put a comedian in the United States Senate, and the next governor, of course, is going to be the My Pillow guy.
Oh,
who's completely normal.
Do they still have the Farmer Labor Party?
The DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor Party. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know, but the My Pillow guy, the fact that My Pillow guy is still actually out there and has people who would put him on the air when he'd be a perfect example of somebody, he's either certifiably insane or running for something.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, Mr. My Pillow guy, who's now saying that he's so excited that Dominion Voting Systems is suing him, that he says that by August, because of his countersuit or whether it's going to be his discovery, by August, Donald Trump will be back in power. Okay.
Yes, I saw that. Yep. So again, that seems completely rational and normal. And the Republican Party is probably going to nominate him.
Yeah. Okay.
By the way, don't you wish Dominion could control, could just sue every single Republican who supported Donald Trump's lies about the election all these years? For the past 5 months or however long it's been.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to come down to it that if there's going to be accountability for the big lie, it's going to come from Dominion Voting Systems and its lawsuit, because apparently there's going to be no political accountability for all of these lies. Okay, since we've been beating up on Republicans, can we talk about Andrew Cuomo for a minute?
Sure.
latest story about it. You want to talk about a guy, look, the elites and why people hate politics. The latest story is, and again, this is so New York politics. It sounds just so Cuomo, that he basically prioritized taking care of his family and friends and getting them, the COVID tests, and they would have state patrol officers, take the tests and get them expedited tests, and this would include his brother Chris Cuomo, this is, again, the guy stands up there as the tribune of the people, but he's taking care of the inner circle, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And, it's, I have to say that even back in the middle of this, I mean, I guess because I am not a partisan and no longer have a party affiliation, I can be sort of gimlet-eyed about all of them. But I remember CNN doing these, really sort of jokey things with Chris Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo teasing each other on the air, and that was all very, great, because you had the great governor and the great, broadcaster. And I just thought, this is over the line. CNN should be embarrassed. It's not appropriate. I mean, if they were to uphold good standards, that, Cuomo, the Chris Cuomo would have had to stay a million miles away from his brother while on the air. Other people would have done that, interview or whatever. It was all very cozy and incestuous and bad. And Cuomo has had the reputation for years for corruption. By the way, as our friend and colleague Bill Kristol pointed out, New York, big important state, has one of the most, it's extremely corrupt. It's almost like Illinois. It's pretty bad.
It is. It's amazing the number of governors and attorney generals that have resigned in scandals and everything.
Exactly. Remember Elliot Spitzer? I mean, that wasn't even that long ago. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty. It's a pretty corrupt place, and there were stories, and I guess people on the right might say, with at least some justification, that in the midst of all of this, enthusiasm about Cuomo as the anti-Trump last year, people forgot that there was a commission that Cuomo dissolved that was supposed to look into corruption when it got too close to him. These are the sorts of things that people, they would do well not to lose their heads over.
Fawn not on the mighty. Best advice I ever had.
Exactly.
Right. So let me ask you a really awkward question.
Uh-oh.
How worried, how freaked out should we be about what might come from the murder trial of Derek Chauvin? And the reason I'm asking that is, to me, a reasonable person on the outside, whether you're white or black, that image of the murder of the killing of George Floyd is such an indelible image. There's just no justification. If this officer is acquitted or he gets off with a wrist slap, what's going to happen?
Yeah, okay, so that's horrifying to contemplate.
I know.
But I have a couple of reasons for mild optimism. One is that the judge in the case has allowed in three counts, so that the jury doesn't have to go all the way to second-degree murder if it's uncomfortable with that for any reason. It has lesser charges that are also pretty good in there. So that's at least some reassurance that he won't get off. But can I just say a word about some of the things I've been seeing on conservative media about this?
Yes,
because
please.
It's so disgusting. I mean, people say, oh, here's the truth. He had fentanyl in his system and he had other drugs. And the fact is, so that means, police have experience with drug addled people that they come in contact with all the time, right? They know that some of the people that they're arresting might have drugs in their system. And that means they should know that the person might be, more susceptible to, say, having a heart attack or asphyxiation or whatever when you put your knee on their neck for 9 minutes. I mean, the fact that they're using this as a way to exonerate the officer is just mind-blowing. And apparently, I'll tell you one other thing that I heard when I was looking into this a little bit. Chauvin, on a previous occasion, when he was arresting somebody, put him on his side, put the victim on their side rather than on his stomach in order to help him breathe. And he was credited with saving the guy's life by that move. So the prosecution is going to point out that he knew there were ways of preserving the airway, right? And knew there was another alternative, and he didn't use it in this case. Anyway, that's just. But I just find the rush or the eagerness to say that it was George Floyd's own fault. He had drugs in his system. It wasn't anything about the.
Well, there is a strain out there of people who find a way to justify all of these killings of Black teenagers and men, Ben Shapiro, or minimize them. That is disturbing. It is this attempt to say that no, there's no problem. Look, again, it's not conservative to not want to have justice, and it's certainly not conservative to watch a private citizen be treated with this kind of brutality by the state. You put this in any other context, and they'd be outraged about it. But when it comes to cops and Black men, this sort of attempt to say that there's no legitimacy to the Black Lives Matter movement is it's really become. Look, it's not new, but it feels like it's escalating. That you have the Tucker Carlsons and the Ben Shapiros who've become so now invested in racism's not really a thing. We don't have a racist problem. We don't need to confront this. This is only something that social justice warriors and people on the left care about. This is all exaggerated. And we talk about Black people who commit crimes more. I mean, they are really into
that. Yeah.
No, they're into that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't want to do or say anything that will give aid and comfort to that kind of dishonest and really malevolent interpretation of events. On the other hand, I do have to say that there are certain things that I think are valid to point out, and one of them is that the response to the anti-Asian violence that happened in Atlanta, where there was a shooting where this guy, killed 6 Asian women and maybe 2 other people as well. And everybody rushed to say that this was because of white supremacy. Now, of course, white supremacy is a real thing. It is the worst, and causes terrible suffering. And there, the Dylan Roof, and so on and so forth. So yeah, real thing. Don't want to deny that, but there was a huge rush to declare that to be a case of anti-Asian bias, and it was. But to shoehorn all of the violence, the uptick in violence against Asians that we have seen in the past year during the pandemic, and say that's all white supremacy, I think was overdone, because the violence against Asians in America, if you look into it, has been done by all races. I mean, African Americans have attacked Asians, whites have attacked Asians, others, Hispanics. So it's not correct to say that it's purely a matter of white supremacy. There have been other people have also been victimizing Asians in the past year with the advent of coronavirus and Trump's horrible rhetoric about, the China virus and so on and so forth. So
no, you're right. It's not just white, but the anti-Asian violence is a real thing. And
it is.
There's a new video out in New York of of a 65-year-old Asian woman who's knocked down. She's leaving a store and somebody says, "You don't belong here," knocks her down, kicks her in the head twice. And the security guard inside the store, I don't know if you've seen this video, just
I haven't.
watches, doesn't do anything, and just casually closes the door. Doesn't do anything at all. I mean, it's really, it's one of those videos that ought to shock the conscience of the nation. Okay, so while you and I have been talking, Mona, Axios came out with a story that Representative Matt Gaetz has privately told confidants he is seriously considering not seeking re-election and possibly leaving Congress early for, wait for it, a job at Newsmax. Yeah, this
is the greatest news.
But this is the new paradigm that people go,
absolutely.
I can be a lawmaker or I can be a right-wing pundit. And basically, since being a lawmaker doesn't actually mean making any laws or doing any legislating, I'm just a pundit anyway. Why not just go right? Why not just inject it straight in? Let's just take the intravenous. So Matt Gaetz, it wasn't that long ago that people would not have necessarily thought that that a sitting congressman in a relatively safe district would think it was a promotion to go to work at Newsmax. But here we are. This is 2021.
There we are. I remember when I met Jason Chaffetz, a while back. And here's this young, tall, handsome, congressman from, where's he from? He's from somewhere in the Midwest where you are, right?
No, wasn't he like Utah? He was Utah.
Or maybe it's Utah. Yeah. Utah. Sorry.
Yeah.
And seemed bright and interesting. And I thought, up and comer in the Republican Party. Nope. He left to become a Fox News commentator. That's the path.
It is. And Sean Duffy was the congressman from Wisconsin who's married to Rachel Campos Duffy. He quit in the middle of his term. Now he had some family issues, but he's now a Fox News contributor as well. And the Madison Cawthorns of the world, you can just tell. I mean, they go to Congress, and being in Congress is not as important as being being famous, getting the clicks, being a social media star. So that he's eventually going to go and be a talking head somewhere as well. But we at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about the weird incentive structure to be crazier and more extreme. Well, this is part of it, and this is part of it. But
it is, and even though I jokingly said this is good news, and meaning at least that Gaetz be out of Congress, it's not good news because he will be injecting poison and lies into the bloodstream of conservatism, Inc., which is the true root of many of our worst problems as a country.
I'm willing to make the trade-off, though. Because I figure that's happening on Newsmax anyway. And to have a guy like Matt Gaetz out of Congress is, let's just say, it's an upgrade for the body, probably. Although, given some of the the people coming out of the woodwork running for offices, that's not necessarily guaranteed. It's not.
You're absolutely right.
There's always somebody worse waiting in the wings. So with that, Mona Charen, thank you so much for joining me. And again, make sure you check out Mona's podcast. Comes out every Friday, Beg to Differ. Who's your guest this week? Do you know yet?
Bret Stephens.
Really? That should be interesting. Is Brett still hanging on over there at the New York Times? So
apparently, yep.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do this all over again.